Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football, a massive Big 12 matchup. Kansas heading on the road to play BYU. You got to start with the environment. Night games in Provo, Utah. It's the most underrated environment in all of college football. Nobody wants to talk about it. It doesn't get much better than night games in Provo, Utah. It's a very hard place to win, especially against the BYU team that's just winning a lot of football games in 2024 now. The real intriguing part of this matchup, Kansas. Yeah, 3-6, 2-4 in conference play. This is not what we expected from Kansas heading into 2024 against Iowa State. That was by far the best version of Kansas that we've seen all of 2024. And if they can play that way on the road against BYU, this is an extremely dangerous Kansas Jayhawks team. And there's some really, kind of intriguing matchups that we're going to see in this football game. Really excited to get into it now. Before we do, and as always, I think most importantly to the Big 12 fans, this conference has been just an absolute blast to talk about. The amount of support y'all have shown the boys for these preview prediction episodes, it's been amazing. Appreciate you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Without further ado, let's get into this one. I want to start with what we saw from this Kansas offense against Iowa State. This reminded me of the Kansas offense that we saw in 2023. That was one of the hardest offenses to defend in all of college football. It's predicated off running the football. They ran the football very well against Iowa State, over 230 yards rushing. And then when they want to throw the football, they're going to be explosive. Like Jalen Daniels was only 12 of 24 in that football game throwing, but it was for 295 yards. Jalen Daniels' average depth to target was 20 yards down the field against Iowa State. They were being extremely explosive through the air, and that's kind of how Kansas wants it to look. Right? We want to run the football. That's kind of how we want to run our offense. We got Jalen Daniels, who's a dynamic quarterback in the backfield, along with what continues to be one of the most underrated running backs in the country in Devin Neal. It's a very hard rushing attack to stop. They're going to force you to put some bodies in the box to try to deal with this Kansas rushing attack. And when you do that, Kansas is going to try to beat you over the top with that vertical passing attack. And it all came together against Iowa State. Jalen Daniels was making the throws he needed to make down the field. That was probably the best game that we've seen from Jalen Daniels as well. When Kansas is playing like that on offense, it's a very difficult offense to deal with. Now, a couple key matchups on this side of the football. One, Kansas's rushing attack versus these BYU linebackers. I don't think BYU's, especially in the first half against Utah, the run fits weren't great. Now, the reason I say that, I think BYU has really, really solid linebackers. They're going to ask these BYU linebackers to operate in space. Defend a lot of perimeter runs, go sideline to sideline. The biggest question that I'm looking for in that matchup is, hey, can BYU's linebackers play sideline to sideline and not let some of that stuff to the perimeter that Kansas likes to run hit for big chunk plays? They're going to test you. They're going to give you a lot of pre-snap motion. They're going to give you a lot of eye candy. When you have to be responsible for Jalen Daniels keeping those balls on read options, it's really hard on linebackers in terms of the eye discipline. That's why this Kansas offense is so difficult to defend. It's hard to deal with everything that's going on in that Kansas offense. How do the BYU linebackers specifically operate in space is one of the things we're looking at. I think secondly, BYU, and BYU is an awesome team, and we've been very vocal about that. If there's one thing that I think BYU can improve on heading into the back half of the season that just makes them a little bit more dangerous, it's the pass rush, especially just winning with your front four. You look at Jalen Daniels, it's been kind of a roller coaster for him, and he specifically has struggled in a big way when he's been under pressure, when he hasn't had clean pockets. That's when he makes some bad decisions. That's when he's not accurate with the football. He's only completing 33% of his footballs when he is under pressure. Can BYU impact Jalen Daniels? And it doesn't necessarily need to be sacks because he's a very hard quarterback to bring down with how athletic he is, but can you impact him in the pocket? Can you disrupt the pocket but not let him get outside the pocket? Those are some of the things that I think BYU needs to, try to do to impact Jalen Daniels and not let him play his best football. Because when Jalen Daniels is playing his best football, he is a very, very difficult quarterback to deal with. Last matchup, turnovers. Look, BYU, we say this all the time. There will be some analytic nerds, you might say, that say, BYU's just getting lucky with turnovers. We're middle of November right now. I think at some point you just got to give BYU credit for being really good at forcing turnovers. They're forcing 2.5 turnovers per game. That's number 3 in the country. Jalen Daniels, when this Kansas team is struggling, is really loose with the football. And he's going to try to make a lot of big time throws, but he's also going to put the ball in harm's way. Can BYU capitalize on those opportunities? That's going to be a question. It seems like every time BYU has a chance to turn the football over, they're making the plays. They'll need to do that against Kansas this weekend. Those are the 3 things that I'm looking at on that side of the football. Now you flip the sides and say BYU probably their worst offensive performance against Utah. And I think it's important to remind people, one, Utah is a very, very good defense playing in Rice-Eccles Stadium, not a very easy place to play. They still put up 339 yards of total offense. I thought the second half offense was really good. A couple of things I'm looking at in this football game. One, can you hit explosives in the passing attack? This Kansas secondary, at least in my opinion, has been kind of disappointing. Like you look at the names that you have in the back end and say, you kind of like what they have. And they're pretty good in terms of completion percentage. They're only giving up a 60% completion percentage. That's 64th in the country. That's nothing to write home about in terms of not being good. Now, the bugaboo with that number is they are allowing 8.5 yards per pass attempt. That's 107th. So although they might not be giving up a super high completion percentage, they're giving up some explosive plays, not only vertically down the field, but they're not tackling all that good in the secondary either. Can BYU with guys like Lassiter and Chase Roberts hit some explosive plays in the passing attack? And I think secondly, Kansas can get after the passer from a couple of different ways. They can win with their front four, but they also bring a lot of blitz packages. BYU struggled with the negative plays against Utah. I thought that was the reason we saw this BYU offense struggle mostly against Utah was they were 1 of 12 on third downs. That didn't really have much to do with the third down operation. I thought it had a lot more to do with taking negative plays on first and second down, putting yourself in those third and long spots where that's not where you want to operate if you're any offense. You got to avoid taking the negative plays. You got to stay on schedule. You got to continue to give yourself those third and short and third and like reasonable situations where your whole playbook is open. You know, we all know Jake Retzlaff. He's a gunslinger and he can do a lot of really good things. He's probably at his least comfortable when he's just a pure drop back passer. You want to give him a run game. You want to give him play action. You want to be able to get him outside the pocket. He's a very good athlete that can throw on the run at a very high level. When you're in those 3rd and 10 situations, it's hard to incorporate a lot of that stuff. And I thought that's why you saw BYU's offense struggle against Utah. Can you avoid negative plays and can you hit the explosives when you have the opportunity? That's kind of what it comes down to in this football game for me. Now you kind of get into the pick here. I think you got to start with it. It depends on what version of Kansas you get. You get that version of Kansas that we just saw against Iowa State. That's going to be a very, very tough game for BYU. Now, if you get the version of Kansas that we've seen, you know, in the month of October and September, I think BYU could win this game pretty handily if they're forcing turnovers, giving their offense a short field and stopping the run game. I'm going to take BYU to cover the 3 points because at the end of the day, you've just seen BYU continue to figure out ways to win and play good when it matters. And you can't really say the same for Kansas. Now, they looked really good against Iowa State. And if they can continue that, it's going to be a close game. But at this point in the season, one, I ain't ever going to bet against BYU at night. And I think more importantly, I think you just have a little bit more trust in this BYU team figuring out ways to win than you do Kansas. This is going to be a really, really fun game. I think it's 2 offenses and 2 teams in general that are very fun to watch. Get your coffee ready, 10:15 Eastern time kick. On the East Coast, those are the demon hours, and I'll certainly be up for this football game. Appreciate y'all rocking with it. If you guys do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.